What's very striking about this committee, Mr. Adeyemo, is that we've got a number of members who serve on finance and intelligence. And your background has a very impressive intersection between those two areas, economics and intelligence. And in our meeting, we discussed your national security experience and how Treasury's purview through the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, sanctions policy would be an important part of your duties, and also to make sure that any money laundering efforts were ones that we examined very carefully, because we only want transactions that were held to high standards. So I have a couple of items I want to touch on, but in the context of how you plan to address this part of Treasury's portfolio. And on day one, I'm struck by this matter of widespread interest on sanctions stemming from the executive order on China in November. And it obviously had national security implications. And I would be interested, as part of your answer with respect to this part of your portfolio, is what kind of approaches would you recommend to go after the top Chinese firms in this area, and what kinds of targets would be appropriate? So give us your general views, and then specifically that question, because a lot of members are getting asked about it.
Well, Senator, let me start by thanking the members of this committee and Congress for the work that was done in the NDAA to advance legislation that would give us additional authorities. When I served in the Obama administration on a regular basis, when I would visit with international counterparts, they would ask why the United States didn't have legislation that could look at beneficial ownership. And I couldn't give them a good answer. Now I can, and I'm appreciative to the members that have worked on that. If confirmed as Deputy Secretary of the Treasury, one of my primary goals will be implementing that legislation in order to put us in a position in which we can protect the country. Stepping back and addressing the committee's interest in China, as the President has made clear, China is our top strategic competitor. Where China is willing to compete on a level playing field, I believe the American people, our companies and our firms will be more innovative and have the ability to be successful. Where China is not willing to play on a level playing field, it's important that we hold them accountable to the rules that they have agreed to in the international system. I believe this needs to be done in some cases unilaterally, but always best to do multilaterally, working with other countries, especially our allies, to demonstrate to the Chinese that they're isolated when they violate the rules of the road. That's going to be my approach to dealing with the issues that relate to China. With regard to the executive order that you mentioned, I look forward to sitting down with my colleagues at the Treasury Department and the government to understand implementation and how it's being implemented, and to working with you and members of the committee to look at how we can use the tools that exist today to hold China accountable.
Good. And I understand you want to talk to your colleagues about that. We would be interested if you want to add anything else for the record about what kinds of approaches you might recommend with respect to going after those top Chinese firms. That's particularly my concern. Let me ask you about this issue of racial disparities. We are going to put a special focus during this session of Congress here in the Finance Committee on longstanding economic failures and inequities in our country. And people of color were already disproportionately burdened by wage gaps before the pandemic. The communities of color have been disproportionately affected both in terms of illness, death, and financial devastation by the pandemic. And women are almost twice as likely as men to have lost a job. And this has been a priority for me in terms of getting economic equity for people of color and women for a long time. Now, my question is, if we're really going to correct those historical disparities, it's important for policymakers to understand where tax benefits, really tax expenditures, are going. Unfortunately, Treasury's Office of Tax Analysis has consistently omitted analysis of tax expenditures by race and gender. So my question, Mr. Adeyemo, and I think we've talked with you about this, would you support including this important tax analysis by race and gender in Treasury publications, and commit to working with all of us, Senator Crapo, I, and others, to obtain this important transparency into our tax system?
Senator, I'm committed to working with you on this issue. I agree with you that it is critical that we understand how the policies that we're implementing have an impact on the American people, especially those most harmed in marginalized communities. I think it's critical both morally for us to address this issue, but it's also a critical economic issue that we unlock the unrealized potential of marginalized people in this country in order to grow our economy and make sure that we're competitive going forward.
Okay.